going to move to the next presentation in this session, and then we'll still have some time to come back to Zishan's presentation after that. I'm going to request Azeemah Saleem, who is a doctoral candidate at the Center for West Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, India, JNU. And she's going to speak on the quest for reformative supranational Islamic organizations. Over to you, Azeemah. Can you please take the floor and share your thoughts or presentation?
Thank you so much for this presentation and for this platform, and a very good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are sitting there. So basically, I'm a doctoral candidate in Center for West Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and my doctoral thesis is I'm trying to see the problem of Syrian refugees from a theoretical perspective of global justice. So while looking from those theoretical aspects, I came across that how international organizations play a very important role in political structuring this injustice, which has been creating so much of refugee crisis. It got me an idea that we also have within the Muslim majority country a very structured organization, very structured Islamic organizations, which is basically run by the Muslim majorities. And despite of that, there's a huge human suffering in almost all the Muslim majority countries. There is a Afghanistan crisis, there is an Iraq crisis, there is a Kurdish question, there's a Shia-Sunni conflict, then Arab uprising, civil wars followed by it. The series of events has been long, and this has actually resulted in a consistent increase in the number of refugees. So looking at these aspects, I came across there are few fundamental questions which raised me, which actually gave me to look into this idea of reforming supranational Islamic organizations. And these questions was what accountability these institutions have to check the violation of human rights which is happening in the region. Secondly, why they lack so much of legitimacy in the region. And thirdly, why there is so much of unsystematic accommodation. Based on these three questions, my paper tried to explore how the international organization has been playing, specifically the Islamic organization has been playing their role in these kind of sufferings, in these kind of problems. And there's not just the problem of refugees, there's a problem of growing poverty, there's a problem of health, there's a problem of civil war, also there's a problem of immigration and so forth. So looking at these aspects, I try to understand how this moral intervention of any international Islamic organization is going to help this, and what are the problems, what exactly are the problems which is making these organizations very ineffective in nature in a broader scenario. And thirdly, in how these problems can be solved and reformed into a better understanding, into a better effective manner. So I've tried to explore a different reformative approaches, which might or might not be accepted by everyone, but it's just a policy making paper which try to give an idea that these are the problems and we can solve it through that aspect. Before moving on, I'll also like to point out that there is a very sharp distinction between an international and supranational organization. When we talk about international and supranational organization, we have to be very careful how we are treating the organization, because most of the organization in the Muslim majority country. In the paper, I have tried to narrow it down to Organization of Islamic Cooperation, because this is one of the largest Muslim organization, and actually the second largest after United Nations, because it consists almost all the Muslim majority countries as its member, and it also one of the most vibrant in nature, because it has countries from all over the world, from all over the continents, from all over the culture. Despite of that, these organizations, they have structured themselves in such a manner. So I'll try, there are different organizations as well in the Muslim majority, like there is a Muslim World League, but again, that has been supported heavily by Saudi Arabia. Then there is Islamic Development Bank, that's not an organization but a part of OIC, and then there is another Islamic organization. So looking all this, and beside that there are many sub-regional organizations, which is very important when we try to look the problem in the effectiveness of these supranational organizations. supranational organizations. The problem, first things we have to establish these, why, if I try to take the case study of OIC, why exactly it was established? It was established in order to look at the problem, especially the Jerusalem problem and the Palestine questions, to look at this problem. All the Muslim countries to come together to work on solidarity, to develop a peace, to have a common a common solution to a problem, to develop a conflict resolution. It's like dealing internally, which we have heard in the keynote in our first panelist, to deal our problem internally without taking it forward. So the main idea of OIC was established on this, and later on it was realized that the members of OIC countries are now the largest hosting countries of largest hosting refugee countries. Like in Turkey, there are around 2 million of refugees. Pakistan also hosts around 1.5 million of refugees. Iran, Ethiopia, Jordan, they also host around 650,000 approximately around refugees. And especially with the uprising and with the Syrian crisis, since my work has been specifically on Syrian crisis, so I've tried to focus that how the Syrian crisis has triggered the relevance, why the OIC or the Islamic organization was not there to deal with this such a huge issue, why it has not played a very significant role, if when the people were dying out of uh, out of war, out of crossing the border, out of seeking asylum, where this organization was, why it remained just a mouthpiece. So in order to understand this, there is, first we need to understand that within OIC there is a huge state conflict members, like the state members of for all the sort of national dialogues, but they lack mechanism in their functionings. Most of the like I said, there is a difference between, there's a huge vibrancy within Muslim countries as well. Some are very rich, some are very poor. So these rich countries are not accommodating their refugees, but and directly or indirectly uh, uh, they have been affecting the refugees. They have been, you know, they have been causing. They have been one of the reasons for the cause of refugees. So how, despite of the facts, they have done a huge humanitarian support, but not in the name of the supranational Islamic organizations. Whenever there is a mediation mission, like it's always the Arab League who will initiate the mission, and which is always forwarded by the OIC, which also shows that these missions are very multi institutionally overlapped. So this institutional overlap has to be checked, has to be discussed, and has to be understood in a manner that it is not being used by the powerful countries as their own for their personal region. Then there is a problem of a regional conflict, the power, the tussle for a regional power or regional influence in the region, like Iran, Saudi. When the Arab League of Arab States passed a resolution to suspend Syria from after the Syrian crisis, it was not taken a proper recommendation, or it was not in a consensus, which was objected by the Iran, because Iran always believed in having an open space of discussion, while other states decided to suspend that Syria from its members. So this shows that there is a tussle within the organizations, which is actually creating a problem in its effectiveness. That has to be dealt through the proper negotiation to sit down what exactly is beneficial for Syria, whether to suspend or to deal with the negotiations, rather than looking for their own interest or for their own influence in the region. So this is one of the regional conflicts which has been problematizing the effectiveness of the supranational Islamic organization. Besides that, the regional tussle between Saudi and Arabia has been very known, and this has been creating. Imagine if, hypothetically speaking, if those countries has been united into an aspect to work together, they might be able to develop something which is very huge without the interference of an external power, without who has been always there in the region to use for their own interest. Secondly, the role of the Arab League or the role of the GCC, they always believe in having a regional solution for the regional conflicts. They doesn't believe in going to any supranational Islamic organizations or to other organizations to deal with such issues. They feel like it is their responsibility, and beyond that, they are willing to coordinate or collaborate with the United Nations. This is rather than collaborating with OIC. This also shows that they are also not very confident about these organizations which they have formed among themselves. So this is also show a sense of mistrust, a sense of not legitimizing the organizations which you form on yourself, and the things which you are using for your own purpose as a mouthpiece just for the regional influence, whatever, whenever it is, whenever you require. So the major reasons of this failure, which I have pointed out, is firstly, there has been a single hegemonic theory in the West Asia. They have always, whenever there's a crisis, it mostly turns into a proxy war or proxy conflicts, like the case of Syria, now in the case of Libya and the other places. So this idea of putting their influence rather than getting the solution out of it, rather than working on a negotiations, it also a big problem. Secondly, the foreign intervention in the region. The foreign intervention in the region is also creating a problem. Suppose US has been supporting Saudi Arabia, it's been sanctioning Iran. So it is making its own space, its own way into the region for their own interest, and trying to divide the region for their own purpose. So we need to be very careful what external interventions we need and how much intervention is required for a particular aspect. Thirdly, there is no crystallized institutional structures. Like when we talk about these different institutions, these whether it's a supranational Islamic institutions like OIC or IDB, or whether it is a sub-regional institutions, there is no crystallized institutional structures. And fourthly, there is a weak domestic base, because most of the states in the Arab regions have a weak state structures. Their more priority is building on states, not on a community, not on a Muslim community as a whole. So their priority is to make states, to focus on the state building, and more importantly, their own rules or their own power, their own establishment in this particular state, if in case it is an authoritarian or monarchical or military state. So this actually goes against the principles and the objectives of the OIC, which had been established. Then the most important problem, the fifth problem, is the institutional overlap. Suppose the one who is the member of Arab League is also a member of GCC, is also a member of OIC, is also like the member states has been part of different institutions. So it's okay to be a part of institutions because it is the hour of need and it is required, but there should be some sort of limitations on what situation and how the situation has to be dealt. And if it has been dealing by a supranational Islamic organizations, what limitations should be there, and to what extent a state or a member state should go. The problem of institutional overlap is actually giving a convenience to the member states to use their power or use their status according to their own self-interest. The sixth problem was the weak civil society. There is or NGOs which undermine, like there is a huge violation of human rights by this organization as well. There has been no strong speak up, strong condemnations by these organizations against the violation of human rights, whether in the case of Syrian crisis, whether in the case of other crises. So there is no civil society strong enough to function or question that why these organizations has not been accountable, has not been working up to the mark, has not been followed up by the principles. And the last reason I figured it out, that it is also because generally we fail to check the authoritarian regime. But again, this has its limitations because most of the Arab member states have or more or less authoritarian in nature. So it is something which cannot be overcome. So looking at these failures or the reasons of failures, I try to understand that there is a road, there is already a supranational Islamic organizations which can work, which has already established in itself. We just need a reformations internally, which need to work on it, and it can also be worked through the Islamic context or Islamic principles. as well. Like even if we take the case of refugees, we have right to asylum, which was given in Islamic text as well. It has been discussed in Islam for a very long period of time. So we can also use that parameters. We can work on that aspects. Secondly, there has been a reformation among the states of the role of powerful. One of the very interesting thing which I found that OIC is a quite vibrant state. OIC has vibrancy of member states. So if there is a problem in one region, the member states of other region, like if there is a problem in Arab states, or if there is a problem in Syria, countries like Pakistan, who is powerful enough in OIC, country like Indonesia, who has a good say in OIC, can take a leadership role or a leadership responsibility in order to deal with that problem, because there won't be any, they have to go beyond their interest of legal and moral authorities and to deal with this problem as a moral responsibility or a leadership responsibility. And it can, it can create a space, good space or an open space for all the acceptable space for every member state, not just based on self interest. So again, then the most other important aspect is the funding aspect, because every organization has been based on some sort of funding, and the one who has been the biggest donor in the organization has more to say, has more influence in the organization. So this is also has some sort of impact on an organization. So one there, even if there is a larger say, because even if we try to relate it with the United Nations, we are having the same problem of legitimacy with the United Nations right now also, because all its decisions are controlled and biased by the United States, because one of their largest funders. So similarly, if OIC is also having a largest funder is Saudi, and all its decisions are influenced by him, it has lost its legitimacy. So despite of having those donors, despite of having those fundings, one need to set the limitations on the kind of influence they give on the decision making process. And secondly, the failure to pay their annual memberships, because there are so many member states in Muslim countries who are so poor to pay their annual membership. So they should be trained or economically developed in such a manner that they are able to pay their membership annually or regularly. Then the other aspects, the fifth aspect I figure it out is the long-term sustainability by overcoming cultural and political barriers. So what exactly are the long-term and cultural barriers? So one need to understand Muslim community is quite vibrant in nature. They are very different. So there is a problem. There was a situations where the Kuwaiti government refused to take Syrian refugees in their inside their borders, saying that they are very different culturally from us. So we cannot take them. Turkey is more culturally related to them. So this actually creates a line between a cultural divide between two different, between someone who is very hegemonic in nature. They speak same language, they speak same, but there is a cultural tussle because of this. So one need to go beyond this understanding, beyond this level of barriers, and to deal with it. The other thing is for conflict mediations. If there is any sort of conflict mediations, no single approach can work, because it required a multi-approach methods. They need a consensus or an agreement by the member state. If a single member is taking, like in the case of Saudi or Kuwait, taking a decision of suspending Syria from its memberships, they should take this into consideration, that it is not something, it's not the decision. It has to be taken by consensus, through consensus. It has to be taken through an agreement. Then the principle of partnerships. Coming to the principle of partnership, one of the very interesting aspects this came across when I was trying to understand the accommodation of refugees. Because if you try to see within the Muslim countries, there are only few specific countries. There is a huge chunk of refugees, and while the other doesn't take or doesn't provide any asylum status to the refugees. So why is that? So even if you have a demographic limitations, you can pay them humanitarian, just like Japan does it with the United Nations. But if you have the capability, you need to treat that with partnership And if you cannot give them if you have a demographic limitations, you need to give a proper compensations to the countries who are hosting the refugees. Then there is the main important aspects which I find to be very effective, that these organization has to be accountable to at least its minimalistic foundation of human dignity. That is the basic anyone could expect from any organization. Like they need to respect the basic human rights every person, whether it's a refugee, whether it's a persecuted, should have. So any decision, any negotiation or any conflict resolutions which has been made should at least respect this minimum level of human dignity. Second aspects, the problem with the OIC is they always lack or they always get diverted with the right direction. So this organization should not be designed for the rich or by the for the rich. It should be something which is accommodating all the countries in an equitable manner, not just making someone feel very insecure about their position just because they come from a poor country, or should not be used by rich just to become for a regional influence, whether it's Saudi, whether it's Iran, whether it's any country. So it need to establish a right direction for that. And the most important is to overcome the institutional overlapping, because it always lead to a conflict of interest and competition loyalties. So one need to try to understand this double standard policies and try to limit it in a proper manner. Though there are procedural differences, there are procedural limitations or the procedural difficulties which need to take into considerations. One of the interesting things which I found, I think most of the people not agree with me, but it can also be developed by a work fund. I mean, you can develop a small organizations which can develop a work fund. Looking at all these reformations, it sometimes seems very idealistic, but once you start making it philosophically or theoretically approach, it might go to an aspect. To a practical aspect as well. And despite of all these reformations, there are some sort of limitations which can create a lot of problems, like the political structure of the state. There is quite vibrant. If you doesn't get the representative of the if it is not the representation of the state of the citizens, it's difficult to give their say in an international or a supranational organization.
Azeemah, you have 2 minutes to conclude. I'm sorry for
yeah, it's almost there. So I just have 2 points left. The limitations is firstly the lack of state infrastructure which we have, and the second is sectarian polarizations, which is very dominant and very deep in the regions. And the third is the role of external factors, because they have been coming and making things a bit problematic. So overall, what I try to say with the paper is that we do have by we means that the people of a Muslim community do have a strong supranational Islamic organization, but we haven't given much thought, because I haven't come across who has given much scholarly thought on reforming and working on making it strong on these aspects. So one can work on it, make it much strengthened, just follow by its guidelines and principles to make it a combined Muslim community. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azeemah. I think you have raised a very important issue, and thank you for addressing and analyzing this. We have Azeemah. I wanted to ask you a question about the role of OIC. When I look at the charter of OIC as stated on its website, I noticed that it is very driven by the original mandate, which was conflict resolution. Especially in the context of formation of Israel and then the wars. Have you seen in your study of the organization any development in its mandate, or let's say, not just talking about conflicts, whether it is Palestine issue or Kashmir issue or Bosnia, but generally, have you seen any evidence for more focus on developmental issues in the Muslim countries?
Not precisely. It's more or less about conflict whenever there is a conflict in the region, in the Muslim or in the Muslim countries. So they're mostly coming out and taking out some resolution process. So, but that is also one of the issues which I have found, that they are not talking about anything economic aspect, despite of the fact that they have IDB, they have Islamic Development Bank of their own, they are funding it, which is working very regularly, which is funding on a good note. Despite of that, they are not taking the economic aspect, especially for the poor Muslim majority countries, in that rigorous manner. I haven't seen any economic development till now in their approach, and I think it can be a very good way to lead this idea of cooperation, and the way to develop a consensus, or way to develop a Muslim community, if they start concrete projects rather than focusing on their own aspects. These are mostly in the context of OIC, no. But if you go to other sub-regional organizations, yes, there are some sort of economic agreements or economic development that has been going on. But OIC has more or less restricted itself to the conflict resolution itself, despite of the fact that its charter stays extensively on all other aspects as well. Like it talks about social aspects, it talks about cultural aspects, it talks about developing a solidarity among the Muslim states, but it doesn't talk. It hasn't done much in practice. The problem is that they have so many good words on the charter, but the thing is, it is not visible or evident in the reality. So yeah.
Thank you so much.